Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, former President Trump reminded us just a few days ago that he is to blame for the grotesque reversal of women's personal freedom. He said it himself. He said he is, quote, proudly the person responsible for the annihilation of Roe v. Wade. Let me repeat those words because the American people need to hear it over and over again. Donald Trump said, quote, he's proudly the person responsible, unquote, for ending Roe. And yesterday, we saw just another consequence of a post-Roe America. The Arizona Supreme Court upheld a Civil War-era law banning abortion almost entirely, without exception for rape or for incest. The Arizona Supreme Court decision goes as far to suggest that doctors can be prosecuted for assisting in an abortion. All these regressive MAGA judges on the Supreme Court, in some of the other federal courts, and in the state courts, all come from Donald Trump and he appointing MAGA judges and his goal to restrict women's freedoms and to have Roe v. Wade be annihilated. Make no mistake about it, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans own the consequences of the Arizona Supreme Court decision. And does anyone seriously doubt that should Trump become president again, he won't try to add even more extreme jurists to the bench so he can continue his assault on women's reproductive freedoms? Of course they will. If Trump and MAGA Republicans get into power, they would see to it that reproductive freedoms are curtailed even more, from the local level to the national level. Even in his remarks the other day, where he's trying to cover up what he did, he couldn't resist saying he's proudly the person responsible for annihilation of Roe v. Wade. Couldn't resist, because that's where he's at. We know that. And don't take it from me. House Republicans included a national abortion ban in the Republican Study Committee budget. And remember, the Republican Study Committee includes a majority of House Republicans and their leadership, and they came out for a national abortion ban. On IVF, Republicans try to talk a good game about supporting access to reproductive services. But not 1 month ago, Republicans blocked legislation in this chamber that would have preserved IVF protections under federal law. And while Donald Trump hopes people forget it, he himself was on record supporting a national abortion ban when he was president. So, unsurprisingly, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are now trying to hide their anti-abortion records because they know how dangerously out of step their views are with the public. But they can't help themselves, as the president's speech showed 4 days ago. Again, he had to repeat that he was responsible, the one responsible for the abolition of Roe. Make no mistake, that's what they'll do. And make no mistake, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans will have to answer to the American people for what they have done to fundamental liberties in this country today, tomorrow, and in November. On impeachment. Mr. President, as we enter the height of the spring season, there's a lot on the Senate's agenda. We continue to confirm more judges and nominees. We must ensure FISA authorities are renewed during this work period. Off the floor, we continue to work on a host of issues like lowering the cost of prescription drugs and increasing travel safety and AI and so much more. As busy as we are, one issue the Senate will soon have to address is the House vote to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. As everyone knows, yesterday Speaker Johnson announced he's delaying transmitting the articles to the Senate until sometime next week. Our plan over here has not changed. The Senate is ready to go whenever the House is. We want to address this issue as expeditiously as possible. And as I said yesterday, impeachment should never be used to settle policy disagreements. That sets an awful precedent. So when the time comes for the Senate to receive the articles of impeachment from the House, we'll be ready. In the meantime, we're going to keep working on legislation that matters to the American people and do it in a bipartisan way whenever we can. The American people demand, expect, and deserve nothing less. Now on the merger, the proposed merger of Capital One and Discover. Earlier this week, I sent a letter to Capital One and Discover asking for more information about their plans for a multi-billion-dollar merger. If history has taught us anything, it's that when big financial institutions get even bigger, it could have serious consequences for consumers and small businesses alike. Higher interest rates, bigger fees, diminished competition, these could all be at stake. So my letter asked some questions to both Capital One and Discover that the American people deserve to have answered before this merger goes forward. We need to know about market shares in this industry. We need to know about potential increases in fees. We need to know if any workers will be laid off. We need to know how consumers are being made aware of this planned merger. Capital One and Discover are two of the largest credit card issuing institutions in America. If this merger continues as planned, the new company would likely become the largest credit card issuer in the United States of America, with over 400 million customers. So, before these two companies merge, the American people deserve answers to these questions to be sure they won't receive the short end of the stick. On the supplemental, not a generation ago, the thought of any American political party, much less the party of Ronald Reagan, spreading the gospel of Russian propaganda was deemed unthinkable. But today, the apple has indeed fallen very far from the tree. Today, a growing contingency within the hard right is corroding their party from within, turning the party of Reagan little by little into a messaging arm of the Kremlin. 2 months ago, former President Donald Trump, the presumptive presidential nominee of the Republican Party, said he'd encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want, those are his words, to the countries of NATO. Let me say that again. The things that come out of President Trump are really frightening about the future of America, if God forbid he should ever get back in power, which I hope and believe he won't. But here's what he said again. Donald Trump, when he was the presumptive nominee, when 2 months ago, Donald Trump, the presumptive presidential nominee of the Republican Party, said he'd encourage Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell they want, unquote, to countries of NATO. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. In the House of Representatives, pro-Putin radicals say we should reward Russia's violent invasion with a peace treaty instead of standing with Ukraine as they fight for their survival. Sadly, we hear similar things every now and then coming from the fringes of this chamber. Arguments that the war in Ukraine is hopeless, that Ukraine should cede its sovereign territory, that we should cut a deal with Putin, as if he would be satisfied with any deal. These modern-day Neville Chamberlains ignore the warnings of history. Autocrats have insatiable appetites. If you give an autocrat a little land, he'll seek to take a country. And if you give an autocrat a country, he'll seek to take a continent. So the stakes of the war in Ukraine could not be higher. It's not just a war between two nations, but a struggle between two conflict ideals, between democracy and autocracy. And as the greatest democracy in the history of the world, the United States has been called on to take a stand. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call a roll.
Ms. Baldwin.